The night sky turned orange without warning. Una Park was sitting in her small lab when the first explosion shook the ground. Her coffee cup fell from the table and shattered on the floor. She grabbed the edge of her desk and held on as the building trembled around her. She had been on Hestia 7 for 3 years now. 3 quiet years of studying plants, writing reports, and watching the forest from her window. The colony was small, maybe 2,000 people, and life here was peaceful. Boring even. Una sometimes missed the busy cities of Earth, the noise, the crowds. But she had chosen this life. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life forms. And Hestia 7 had plenty of those. The most interesting ones were the Vorn. Una had spent hundreds of hours observing them from a safe distance. They were terrifying creatures. Each adult stood over 2 meters tall, covered in dark fur and hard scales that protected their chest and back like natural armor. Their claws were long and curved, sharp enough to tear through metal. Their eyes glowed amber in the darkness, and their teeth were the stuff of nightmares. The Galactic Council, the organization that governed the known galaxy, had labeled the Vorn as a Category 5 dangerous species. This was the highest danger rating possible. Most alien species refused to land on any planet where Vorn lived. They were considered monsters, beasts, killers. But Una knew better. She had watched them for years. She had seen how they lived in family groups, how they cared for their young, how they mourned their dead. She had observed their complex social rules, their hunting rituals, their quiet moments of tenderness. The Vorn were not mindless beasts. They were intelligent, emotional, and deeply protective of their families. Of course, she had never tried to approach them. That would have been suicide. But she respected them from afar, and she suspected they knew she was there, watching another explosion rock the colony. This one was closer. Una ran to the window and looked outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Ships were descending from the sky. Not the familiar supply vessels from Earth, but strange, angular craft painted black and red. They fired plasma cannons at the ground as they flew, leaving trails of fire and destruction behind them. Raiders. The word echoed in Una's mind like a death sentence. She had heard stories about the Kellic Syndicate. They were pirates, slavers, and resource thieves who operated on the edges of civilized space. They attacked small colonies, took what they wanted, and left nothing but ashes behind. Hestia 7 was supposed to be too remote, too unimportant to attract their attention. Apparently, someone had been wrong. The colony's emergency alarm began to wail. A voice came over the speakers, calm but urgent. All civilians report to emergency bunkers immediately. This is not a drill. All civilians report to emergency bunkers immediately. Una grabbed her emergency kit and ran outside. People were streaming through the streets, some crying, some carrying children, all moving toward the bunkers carved into the hillside at the edge of the colony. Una joined the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. A raider shuttle screamed overhead, so low that Una could feel the heat from its engines. It was heading toward the forest, toward the hills beyond the colony walls. As she watched, it suddenly lurched to the side, trailing smoke. Something had hit it. The shuttle spun once, twice, and then crashed into the hillside with a massive explosion. Una stopped running. She knew that hillside. She had spent months observing it through her telescope. There was a Vorn den there, carved into the rock and hidden by thick vegetation. A family lived there, 2 adults and their cubs. The crash shuttle had landed directly on top of it. Flames were spreading across the hillside. Even from this distance, Una could see the orange glow of fire consuming the trees and brush. The entrance to the den was visible now, exposed by the crash, and smoke was pouring out of it like blood from a wound. Then she heard it. sound that cut through the noise of explosions and alarms and screaming. A high-pitched keening, like the cry of a baby, but deeper, rawer, more desperate. It was coming from the burning den. The cubs. Yuna looked at the bunker entrance. People were still streaming inside, and she could see the heavy doors beginning to close. She had maybe 30 seconds to reach safety. She looked back at the burning hillside. The adult Vorn were nowhere to be seen. They must have been out hunting when the attack began, far from home, unable to return in time. The cubs were alone in that den, surrounded by fire, screaming for help that would never come. Yuna thought about the Galactic Council's classification. Category 5 dangerous species, monsters. Beast. She thought about the tiny cubs she had observed through her telescope, playing in the grass while their mother watched, tumbling over each other like puppies. She thought about how everyone in the galaxy saw the Vorn as nothing more than animals to be feared and avoided. And then she made her decision. Yuna turned away from the bunker and ran toward the fire. Her legs burned as she sprinted across the open ground. The heat grew more intense with every step. Smoke filled her lungs, and she coughed as she ran, but she did not stop. She could hear the cubs crying, their voices growing weaker, and that sound drove her forward like nothing else could. She reached the base of the hillside and began to climb. The ground was hot beneath her feet, and small fires burned all around her. The vegetation crackled and popped as it was consumed by flames. Yuna pulled her emergency thermal blanket from her kit and wrapped it around her body. It would not protect her for long, but it might give her a few extra seconds. Few extra seconds might be enough. She reached the entrance to the den and plunged inside without hesitation. The smoke was so thick that she could barely see her own hands in front of her face. Her eyes streamed with tears, and each breath felt like swallowing fire. But she kept moving, kept pushing deeper into the darkness, following the sound of the crying cubs. Behind her, she could hear the fire growing closer. The entrance was beginning to collapse, rocks falling as the heat weakened the stone. She did not have much time, but she was not going to leave those cubs to die. Not today. The inside of the den was a nightmare. Smoke filled every space, thick and black and choking. Yuna could not see more than a few feet ahead. She moved forward on her hands and knees, staying low where the air was slightly clearer. Her thermal blanket dragged behind her, already hot to the touch. The crying was louder now. She was getting closer. The den was larger than she had expected. It twisted and turned through the rock, with side chambers and storage areas branching off from the main tunnel. Yuna passed piles of bones, the remains of hunted animals. She passed sleeping areas lined with soft vegetation. She passed everything that made this place a home. And all of it was filling with smoke. Her lungs screamed for clean air. Every breath was agony. Yuna pulled the collar of her shirt up over her nose and mouth, but it did almost nothing. She could feel herself growing dizzy, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Keep moving, she told herself. Just keep moving. She found them in the deepest chamber of the den. 5 cubs, huddled together in a pile, their small bodies pressed against the far wall. They were coughing and crying, their amber eyes wide with terror. Their fur was singed in places, and they moved weakly, clearly affected by the smoke. They were so small. The largest was maybe the size of a human toddler, and the smallest could have fit in Yuna's arms like a baby. Despite their claws and their teeth and their predator heritage, they looked exactly like what they were. Children. Frightened, helpless children. Yuna crawled toward them slowly, not wanting to scare them more than they already were. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice rough from the smoke. "I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you." The cubs did not understand her words, but they seemed to sense something in her tone. The largest one, a male with a streak of white fur on his chest, stopped crying and tilted his head. He sniffed the air, trying to understand this strange creature that had appeared in their home. Yuna reached out her hand. The cub bit her. Pain shot through her fingers as sharp little teeth broke her skin. Yuna gasped but did not pull away. She let the cub hold onto her hand, let him taste her blood and learn her scent. After a moment, he released her and made a small sound, almost like a question. "That's right," Yuna said softly. "I'm a friend. Now we need to go." She gathered the cubs one by one. It was not easy. They were heavy, much heavier than human children of the same size, and they squirmed and fought against her. One clawed at her arm, leaving 3 long scratches that immediately began to bleed. Another bit her shoulder. The smallest one cried and struggled, clearly terrified of being held by this strange 2-legged creature. But Yuna did not let go. She wrapped 2 of the cubs in her thermal blanket and held them against her chest. She tucked one under each arm. The 5th, the smallest one, she placed on her back, where the little female clung to her shirt with desperate strength. The weight was crushing. Yuna's legs trembled as she stood. She could barely breathe, both from the smoke and from the pressure on her chest. Every part of her body screamed at her to put the cubs down and save herself. She ignored it. She began to move back through the den, carrying 40 kilos of frightened predator cubs with her. The smoke was thicker now, and she could hear the roar of flames behind her. The fire was inside the den, consuming the sleeping areas, destroying everything the Vorn family had built. Yuna walked faster. The cubs whimpered and cried against her body. She could feel their hearts beating, fast and frightened, like tiny drums. The one on her back dug her claws into Yuna's skin, and Yuna bit her lip to keep from screaming. The entrance was just ahead. She could see a faint glow of orange light, the fire that waited outside. But beyond the fire, there was air. There was sky. There was life. She was almost there when the ceiling began to collapse. Rocks fell around her, small at first, then larger. One struck her shoulder and sent her staggering. The cub screamed. Yuna threw herself forward, running now, carrying the impossible weight of 5 young lives with her. The entrance collapsed behind her. As she burst out into the night, she fell. She could not help it. Her legs gave out, and she tumbled down the hillside, rolling through ash and burning vegetation, clutching the cubs against her body as tightly as she could. When she finally stopped, she was lying in the grass at the bottom of the hill, staring up at the stars. Thought everything hurt. Her hands were burned. Her arms were covered in scratches and bites. Her lungs felt like they had been filled with broken glass. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. But the cubs were alive. They lay around her in the grass, coughing and mewling, but breathing. All 5 of them. Yuna counted them twice, just to be sure. 5 small predators, the children of monsters. Saved by a human woman who had no claws and no armor and no natural weapons at all. Yuna laughed, though it came out as more of a cough. "We made it," she whispered to the cubs. "We actually made it." The smallest cub, the female who had ridden on her back, crawled over to Yuna and pressed her small body against Yuna's side. She was seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking the safety that all children need. Without thinking, Yuna put her arm around the little creature and held her close. That was how the adult Vorn found them. Yuna heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps crashing through the forest. Low growls and rumbling calls. Then they emerged from the tree line. 6 massive shapes moving through the darkness with deadly grace. The Alpha was at the front. He was the largest Vorn Yuna had ever seen, easily 2.5 meters tall, with scars on his face and arms that told of many battles. His amber eyes glowed in the firelight as he approached, and his claws were extended, ready to kill. Yuna did not move. She could not. Even if she had the strength to run, there was nowhere to go. And she would never abandon the cubs. So she lay there in the grass, bleeding and burned, with 5 predator children pressed against her body. And she waited to see if she would live or die. The alpha stopped a few feet away. He lowered his massive head and sniffed at his cubs, checking each one, making sure they were safe. Then he sniffed at Yuna. She met his eyes. She did not look away. The alpha made a sound deep in his throat. It was not a growl. It was something else. Something she had never heard before in all her years of observation. Then he sat down beside her and did not move. They stayed like that, predator and human, surrounded by fire and destruction, until the morning light came. 3 days passed before Yuna could walk again. The colony's medical center was small, but the doctors there did their best. They treated her burns, stitched her cuts, and gave her medicine for the smoke damage in her lungs. The colony administrator, a serious man named Taeho Kim, visited her twice. He asked many questions about what had happened on the hillside. Yuna answered them all. "You should have come to the bunker," Taeho said on his second visit. His voice was not angry, just tired. "You could have died out there." "I know," Yuna replied. "The Vorn are dangerous. Category 5, the most dangerous species in the known galaxy." "I know." Taeho looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head and almost smiled. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the craziest." "Maybe both," Yuna said. On the 4th day, a message arrived at the medical center. It was delivered by a young colonist who looked pale and frightened. He handed Yuna a small device, the kind used for translation between species. "The Vorn sent this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want to see you at their settlement today." Yuna stared at the device in her hand. In all her years on Hestia 7, no human had ever been invited to a Vorn settlement. Most humans avoided the forests entirely, staying behind the colony walls where they felt safe. "Did they say why?" she asked. The young man shook his head. "They just said to bring you. They said you would understand." Yuna understood. At least, she thought she did. She got dressed and walked out of the medical center. Her body still ached, but she ignored the pain. This was too important. The walk to the Vorn settlement took 2 hours. Yuna followed a path through the forest that she had never traveled before, guided by the translation device, which gave her directions in a calm, mechanical voice. The forest was beautiful, filled with strange plants and colorful birds that sang songs she did not recognize. Under other circumstances, she would have stopped to study them. Today, she had other things on her mind. The settlement appeared suddenly, hidden by the trees until she was almost on top of it. It was not what she had expected. She had imagined crude shelters, maybe caves or simple structures made of branches and leaves. Instead, she found carefully built homes carved into the hillside, with doorways tall enough for the massive Vorn to pass through easily. There were fire pits for cooking, storage areas for food, and open spaces where cubs could play. It was a village. A real village, with all the complexity and organization the word implied. The Vorn were waiting for her. There were at least 30 of them, adults and cubs together, arranged in a circle around a large flat stone. The alpha who had found her on the hillside stood at the center. Beside him was an older female, her fur gray with age, her eyes deep and wise. The 5 cubs Yuna had saved sat at the front of the circle. They watched her approach with curious eyes. Yuna stopped at the edge of the circle and waited. The old female spoke first. Her voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together, but the translation device turned her words into simple language that Yuna could understand. "You are the human who entered the fire." "Yes," Yuna said. "You are the one who carried our young to safety." "Yes." The elder tilted her head, studying Yuna with those ancient eyes. "You are small. You are soft. You have no claws, no fangs, no armor. Our cubs could kill you easily, even now. Yet you walked into fire for them. Why? Yuna thought about the question. She thought about all the ways she could answer it. She could talk about her scientific interest in the Vorn, or her professional duty to preserve alien life. She could explain that she had acted on instinct, without thinking, but those answers would be lies, or at least not the whole truth. Because they were children, she said finally. Because they were afraid. Because someone had to help them, and I was the only one there. The elder was silent for a long moment. The other Vorn did not move or speak. Even the cubs were still, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Then the elder turned to the Alpha and spoke in their own language. The translation device did not interpret what she said, but Yuna could tell it was a question. The Alpha responded with a single word, and the elder nodded. In our culture, the elder said, turning back to Yuna, there is a bond called Kethvora. It is the oldest of our traditions, the most sacred. It is the bond of life debt. Yuna listened carefully. When one being saves the life of another, they become connected. Their fates are joined. This is true for our people, and it has been true for 1,000 generations. The elder stepped forward, moving closer to Yuna. Despite her age, she moved with power and grace. But there is an even deeper bond. It is called Kethmora, the bond of one who saves children. In our eyes, there is no greater act. Children are our future, our hope, our reason for living. To save them is to save everything. The elder stopped directly in front of Yuna. Up close, she was enormous, towering over the human woman like a mountain over a hill. You have earned Kethmora, the elder said. You are now Pack Guardian. What threatens you threatens us. What hunts you will be hunted by us. Your enemies are our enemies. Your friends are our friends. This is the old way, and it cannot be undone. Yuna felt her heart pounding in her chest. She understood what was happening, but she could barely believe it. The Alpha stepped forward. He lowered his massive head until his forehead touched Yuna's. It was a gesture of ultimate respect, the highest honor one Vorn could give another. You are one of us now, he said, his voice rumbling through the translation device. From this day forward, you walk under our protection. No harm will come to you while we live. Around the circle, the other Vorn began to make sounds. Low rumbles, soft calls, strange rhythmic noises that Yuna did not understand. It took her a moment to realize what they were doing. They were singing for her. Yuna stood in the center of the circle, a small human woman surrounded by the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, and she listened to their song. Tears ran down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She had walked into fire to save 5 cubs, and in doing so, she had changed everything. The Kellic Syndicate did not know what they had started. Their first attack on Hestia 7 had been meant as a quick raid. Land, take resources, capture slaves, leave. Simple, profitable. They had done it 100 times before on 100 different worlds. But the crash shuttle and the chaos of the first night had forced them to retreat temporarily. They had lost too many soldiers, too many ships. They needed to regroup. 3 weeks after the first attack, they came back. This time, they brought more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. They were not going to make the same mistakes twice. They would crush the small human colony and take everything of value. What they did not know was that everything had changed. Yuna stood on the colony's defensive wall, looking out at the approaching army. Beside her stood Taeho Kim, the colony administrator. On her other side stood Rock, the Vorn Alpha who had found her on the hillside. How many? Taeho asked, his voice tight with fear. At least 500 soldiers, Yuna replied. She was using a telescope to study the enemy forces. Heavy weapons. Armored vehicles. They're not playing around this time. And how many of us? Yuna lowered the telescope. 200 colonists, most of them not trained for combat. 30 security officers with basic weapons. Tejo's face went pale. That's not enough. That's not nearly enough. Rock made a sound deep in his throat. It was not quite a laugh, but close. The translation device around his neck turned it into words. You count wrong, human leader. You forget to count us. Behind Rock, emerging from the tree line, came the VORN. Not just his pack. All of them. YUNA watched in amazement as hundreds of Vorn appeared from the forest. They moved in silence, shadows among shadows, their amber eyes glowing in the fading light. Males and females, young adults and battle-scarred veterans. They had come from all over the planet, from settlements Yuna had never even known existed. Word of the Kethmora had spread. Word of the human woman who had walked into fire for Vorn children. The packs had gathered, and they had come to honor the ancient bond. Tejo stared at the gathering predators with wide eyes. How many are there? Yuna counted quickly. At least 300. Maybe more. 300 Vorn. Tejo shook his head slowly. The Kellic Syndicate has no idea what's coming. The battle began at sunset. The Syndicate forces approached the colony from the south. Their vehicles rumbling across the open ground. Their soldiers marching in formation. They had lights and scanners and all the advantages of advanced technology. The Vorn did not need technology. They struck from the forest without warning. One moment, the Syndicate's rear guard was marching calmly. The next moment, half of them were dead, pulled into the shadows by massive clawed hands. The soldiers screamed and fired their weapons into the trees, but they were shooting at nothing. The Vorn were already gone. This was how Vorn hunted. Patient, silent, deadly. At the front of the Syndicate formation, officers began to panic. Reports were coming in from all directions. Soldiers were disappearing. Patrols were going silent. Something was out there in the darkness. Something that moved like smoke and killed like lightning. The commander ordered a retreat. It was too late. ROK led the main assault personally. He burst from the tree line at the head of 50 warriors, their roars shaking the air like thunder. They crashed into the Syndicate lines like a wave hitting a sandcastle. Armor meant nothing. Weapons meant nothing. The Vorn tore through everything in their path. Yuna watched from the wall. She was not a soldier, so she had agreed to stay behind, coordinating communication between the human and Vorn forces. It was strange work, translating battle commands, sharing information about enemy positions, helping two species that had never worked together before. But it was working. The humans provided what the Vorn lacked. Communication networks, medical support, knowledge of Syndicate tactics and technology. The colonists set up field hospitals where wounded Vorn could be treated. They hacked into Syndicate communications and shared enemy positions with the hunting packs. They provided light and guidance for Vorn warriors, who were fighting in unfamiliar areas, and the Vorn provided what the humans lacked. Raw power, fearlessness, the ability to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies by midnight. The Syndicate army was broken. The survivors fled to their ships and launched into space, leaving behind their dead and their equipment and their dreams of easy conquest. They would carry stories back to the rest of the galaxy. Stories about the nightmare world of Hestia 7, where humans and monsters fought side by side. Those stories would spread far and wide, but Yuna did not care about stories. When the battle was over, she went down from the wall and walked to the Vorn settlement. There was work to be done, wounds to treat, lives to save. She found the 5 cubs she had rescued waiting for her at the edge of the village. They were bigger now, growing quickly as young Vorn did. But they still ran to her when they saw her, crowding around her legs and making happy sounds. The smallest one, a female named Kira, pressed her head against Yuna's hand. Rock approached slowly. He had wounds from the battle, cuts and burns that would leave new scars on his already marked body. But his eyes were bright with something Yuna had never seen in a Vorn before. Pride, respect, gratitude. "You did not fight," he said through the translator, "but you helped us win. Your people and my people, working together. This has never happened before." Yuna nodded. "First time for everything." Rock made that almost laughing sound again. "My daughter has a name for you. She calls you Warm Fire Mother, the one who burns but does not destroy." Yuna looked down at Kira, who was still pressed against her leg. The little Vorn looked up at her with trusting amber eyes. "I like that name," Yuna said softly. "She has also decided something," Rock continued. "She has declared your home her home. Where you go, she will go. She is young and cannot be separated from her mother." Yuna blinked. "A mother is in the settlement." "No," Rock said. "Her mother is standing right here. She has chosen you." For a long moment, Yuna did not know what to say. She looked at the little cub, at the trust in those amber eyes, at the small clawed hand that gripped her fingers. Then she knelt down and wrapped her arms around Kira's fuzzy body. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, little one. I've got you." Around them, the sun began to rise on a new day. The first day of a new world, where humans and Vorn were no longer strangers. They were family. 5 years had passed since the night of fire. Yuna Park stood on the balcony of her home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Below her, the colony of Hestia 7 spread out in all directions, larger now than it had been before. New buildings had been constructed, new roads had been paved, and new people had arrived from Earth and other human worlds. But the biggest change was not in the buildings or the roads. It was in the forest. Where once there had been walls and fences separating humans from Vorn. Now there were paths and bridges connecting them. Humans walked freely through Vorn territory, and Vorn visited the colony whenever they wished. Children from both species played together in the open fields. Human kids riding on the backs of young Vorn. Vorn cubs learning human games and laughing in their strange rumbling way. It was a sight that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Now it was normal. A heavy footstep sounded behind Yuna, and she smiled without turning around. "You're late," she said. Kira's voice came through the translation device around her neck. "I was hunting. The deer are faster this season." Yuna turned to look at her adopted daughter. Kira was fully grown now, standing over 2 meters tall, with powerful muscles beneath her dark fur and claws that could crush stone. She was one of the finest hunters in her pack, respected by all who knew her, and she still called Yuna mother. "Did you catch anything?" Yuna asked. Kira made a satisfied sound. 3 deer. Enough for the feast tonight." Yuna nodded. Tonight was a special night. Representatives from the Galactic Council were coming to Hestia 7, the first official diplomatic visit since the Human-Vorn Alliance had been formed. They wanted to see for themselves what had happened here, on this small world at the edge of civilized space. The news of Hestia 7 had spread across the galaxy. Stories about the human woman who had walked into fire to save predator cubs. Stories about the battle against the Kellic Syndicate, where humans and Vorn had fought as one. Stories about a world where 2 species had learned to live together, not as enemies, but as family. Other colonies had started reaching out to the Vorn on their worlds. Other alliances had been formed. The Galactic Council, which had spent centuries classifying the Vorn as monsters to be avoided, was being forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew, all because of one night. One decision. One woman who refused to let children burn. The council representatives arrived at sunset. There were 5 of them, each from a different species. Yuna recognized a few from her studies, tall insectoid creatures from the hive worlds. short furry beings from the trade moons, and others she had only seen in pictures. They came in an elegant ship that landed gently in the colony's main square. Taeho Kim greeted them formally, as the colony's leader. But it was Yuna they wanted to speak with. The lead representative, a being with silver skin and 4 arms, studied her with eyes that showed no emotion. "Dr. Park," she said through her own translation device, "we have heard many things about you. We wish to understand the truth. What do you want to know?" Yuna asked. "We want to know why you did it." Yuna had answered this question many times over the past 5 years. To reporters, to scientists, to curious visitors from across the galaxy. The answer was always the same, but people always seemed surprised by it. "Because they were children," she said simply. "Because they needed help. Because I could not walk away and let them die." The representative tilted her head. "You risked your life for creatures that could have killed you. Creatures that your own species feared. This does not make sense." "Maybe not to you," Yuna replied, "but it made sense to me." Kira stepped forward, placing herself beside Yuna. She towered over all the representatives, and some of them stepped back in fear. But Kira did not threaten them. She simply stood there, a living proof of what the Alliance had created. "This is my mother," Kira said, her voice proud. "She walked into fire for me and my siblings. She carried us out when no one else would. She did not see monsters. She saw children. That is why we love her. That is why we fight for her. That is why we will always stand with humans." The representatives looked at each other. Yuna could see the confusion in their eyes, the struggle to understand. Finally, the silver-skinned leader spoke again. "The Council has debated what to do about humanity. You are a young species, small, physically weak, confined to a tiny corner of the galaxy. Many argued that you were not worth our attention." She paused. "But events like this have forced us to reconsider. You do not fight like other species. You do not calculate whether mercy is efficient. You do not weigh whether compassion serves your interests. You simply act, often against all logic, because something inside you refuses to let the weak and helpless suffer." Yuna said nothing. She just listened. "This makes you unpredictable," the representative continued. "It makes you difficult to understand. Some on the Council believe it makes you dangerous." "And what do you believe?" Yuna asked. The representative was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly she did something Yuna had never seen an alien do before. She bowed. "I believe it makes you worthy of respect." The other representatives bowed as well. One by one, they lowered their heads to the small human woman who had changed the galaxy without firing a single shot. Later that night, after the feast and the celebrations and the speeches, Yuna sat alone on her balcony. Kira lay beside her, her massive body stretched out on the wooden floor, her eyes closed in peaceful sleep. Yuna looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the story of Hastia 7 was spreading. Other species were hearing about the human-born alliance. Other colonies were learning that the galaxy did not have to be divided into predators and prey. Monsters and victims. Change was coming. Slow change, difficult change, but change nonetheless. And it had all started with a fire. Yuna reached out and placed her hand on Kira's fur. The young Vorn made a happy sound in her sleep and pressed closer to her mother's side. "We did good, didn't we?" Yuna whispered. Kira did not answer. But in her sleep she smiled. And that was enough. Far across the galaxy, in the great halls of the Galactic Council, a new entry was being added to the official records. It would be read by scholars and diplomats for generations to come. Subject: humanity. Classification: revised previous status. Negligible new status. Significant notes: humanity's threat level has been upgraded not because of military power or technological advancement, but because of an unpredictable quality that defies standard analysis. Humans demonstrate an irrational willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, including members of other species. This behavior appears to be instinctive rather than calculated. Recommendation: approach with respect. Humanity may be small, but they are not to be underestimated. They are the species that walks into fire, and they carry others out.